I watched in disbelief as Sheriff Karen planted an official-looking citation on my garage door while 20 strangers wandered through my workshop, picking up my vintage tools and examining my father's old workbench. She was screaming at the crowd to leave private property, but her own paperwork declared this exact space a federal post office. The irony was beautiful. After months of her harassment, I had finally trapped her in her own web of lies. And the best part, everything she was about to lose was completely legal. Life in Millbrook had always been exactly what I wanted. Simple, predictable, peaceful. My little house sat on a corner lot with mature oak trees that had probably been there since before the town was incorporated. The white picket fence was not just for show. It represented everything I valued about this place. My garage was my sanctuary. Not just a place to park the car, but a proper workshop where I spent my evenings and weekends restoring vintage hand tools. Planes, chisels, and saws from the 1940s and 50s. Most people threw these things away, but I saw their potential. I had shelves lined with coffee cans full of screws and nails, all sorted by size. My workbench was solid maple, built by my father in 1962. The neighbors knew me as the guy who would help fix a fence or lend a tool. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought me cookies every Christmas. The Johnson family across the street always waved when they walked their dog past my driveway. I kept my grass cut short and my driveway swept clean. It was during one of those quiet Tuesday afternoons that I first met Sheriff Karen Walsh. I was in the garage, working on a wood plane from 1947, when I heard footsteps on my driveway. She appeared in the doorway wearing a crisp uniform and mirrored sunglasses, even though it was overcast. "Good afternoon," she said, not smiling. "I am Sheriff Walsh. I am conducting routine neighborhood security assessments." I set down my tools and wiped my hands on a rag. "Nice to meet you, Sheriff. Is there anything I can help you with?" She walked into my garage without being invited. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the workbench, the tools hanging neatly on pegboard. She pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down. "This is quite an operation you have here," she said, tapping her pen against the paper. "How many people come through here in a typical week?" The question caught me off guard. People. I mean, neighbors sometimes borrow tools, nothing official. She wrote something else in her notebook. "I see, and you keep regular hours." I laughed, thinking she was making conversation. "I guess you could say that. I am usually out here after work and on weekends." Sheriff Walsh removed her sunglasses and looked directly at me. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "We will be keeping an eye on activities in this neighborhood. Have a good day." She walked away without another word, leaving me standing in my garage with a strange feeling in my stomach. Something about her visit felt wrong, but I could not put my finger on exactly what. 3 weeks later, Sheriff Walsh returned. This time she brought a clipboard, a measuring tape, and Deputy Martinez, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I was reorganizing my tool collection when I heard the squad car pull into my driveway. "Mr. Thompson," she called out before she even reached the garage. "We need to discuss your illegal business operation." I stopped what I was doing and turned around. "I am sorry, what?" She marched into my garage like she owned it, pulling out her measuring tape. "This structure is being operated as an unauthorized postal facility. You are in violation of federal postal regulations." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "Sheriff, this is my garage. I restore old tools. I do not run any kind of postal anything. According to my observations, you maintain regular hours, you have organized storage systems, and you facilitate the transfer of goods between parties." She stretched the measuring tape across my workbench. 24 feet by 18 feet. more than adequate for postal operations. Deputy Martinez shifted uncomfortably near the door. I could see in his face that he thought this was as crazy as I did. Ma'am, with respect, I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding. I fix old tools. When neighbors borrow something, I lend it to them. That is not operating a post office. Sheriff Walsh snapped her measuring tape closed. Mr. Thompson, the Federal Postal Service has very specific regulations about unauthorized postal facilities. You cannot operate a post office without proper permits, federal oversight, and compliance with postal security protocols. But I am not operating a post office, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. The evidence suggests otherwise. She flipped through papers on her clipboard. Regular hours, organized storage, transfer of goods, public access, all characteristics of a postal facility. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of bizarre dream. Sheriff, just because I keep my tools organized does not mean I am running a post office. That is like saying anyone with a neat garage is a federal criminal. She looked up from her clipboard with a smile that made my skin crawl. Mr. Thompson, I am going to give you 72 hours to cease all postal operations on this property. If you continue to operate without proper permits, I will have no choice but to file federal charges. Federal charges for what? Unauthorized operation of a postal facility. It is a federal crime, Mr. Thompson. You could face substantial fines and imprisonment. Deputy Martinez finally spoke up. Sheriff, maybe we should. Deputy Martinez, please wait in the car. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. After he left, she stepped closer to me. Mr. Thompson, I am trying to help you avoid serious legal trouble. Shut down your operation voluntarily, and we can forget this ever happened. I stood there speechless as she walked away, leaving me alone in my garage with the most absurd accusation I had ever heard in my life. I looked around at my tools, my workbench, my organized shelves. A post office. The whole thing was insane. But the fear in my chest was real. The next morning, I drove straight to the police station. I needed to talk to someone with common sense, someone who could make Sheriff Walsh understand how ridiculous her accusations were. The desk sergeant, a friendly older man named Patterson, listened to my story with increasing bewilderment. She said your garage is a post office, he asked, scratching his head. That is exactly what she said. She measured it. She threatened federal charges. Sergeant Patterson shook his head. Mr. Thompson, I have been in law enforcement for 32 years. I have never heard anything like this. Let me talk to the captain. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Captain Bradley, explaining the situation all over again. He listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. Mr. Thompson, Sheriff Walsh operates independently of our department. She is elected, not appointed. I cannot simply overrule her decisions. But Captain, she is clearly wrong. You can see that, right? My garage is not a post office. I understand your frustration, but if she believes you are in violation of federal postal regulations, she has the authority to pursue those charges. I left the police station feeling more frustrated than when I arrived. My next stop was City Hall, where I hoped the mayor or city council could intervene. The receptionist directed me to the city manager's office. Mr. Thompson, I am sympathetic to your situation, said City Manager Roberts. But Sheriff Walsh is a county official. The city has no jurisdiction over her decisions. So there is no one who can stop her. You could consult with an attorney, or you could comply with her request to cease operations. My third stop was the law office of Mitchell and Associates. Attorney Sarah Mitchell listened to my story while taking detailed notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. Mr. Thompson, defending against federal charges is expensive and time-consuming. Even if we win, you are looking at legal costs in the tens of thousands. But she is clearly wrong. Anyone can see that. Being right and proving you are right are two different things. Federal courts move slowly. Sheriff Walsh knows this. She is banking on you not having the resources to fight. I walked out of the lawyer's office feeling defeated. The system was rigged against ordinary people like me. Sheriff Walsh had the badge, the authority, and the legal machinery behind her. I had nothing but the truth, and apparently that was not enough. Meanwhile, her harassment continued. Every day, she or one of her deputies would drive by my house. Sometimes they would park across the street and just watch. Twice, she came to my door claiming she needed to inspect my garage for code violations. The worst part was watching my neighbors' reactions. Mrs. Henderson stopped bringing cookies. The Johnson family stopped waving. When I went to the hardware store, conversation stopped when I walked in. Sheriff Walsh was not just ruining my life. She was destroying my reputation in the community I had called home for 15 years. I spent my evenings sitting in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had brought me so much peace. Now they felt like evidence in a crime I had never committed. The space that had been my sanctuary was becoming my prison. Something had to change. I could not fight Sheriff Walsh through official channels. I could not afford to hire lawyers. I could not rely on the system to protect me from someone who was abusing it. But maybe I could find another way. The final straw came on a Thursday morning. I was getting ready for work when I heard the familiar sound of Sheriff Walsh's squad car in my driveway. Through my kitchen window, I watched her march to my front door with a manila envelope in her hand. "Mr. Thompson, this is your final notice." She did not wait for me to invite her in. She just started talking. "You have 48 hours to permanently cease all postal operations on this property. After that, I will have no choice but to file federal charges." I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was an official-looking document with my name, address, and a list of alleged violations. Unauthorized postal facility operation, failure to comply with federal postal regulations, obstruction of postal oversight. "Sheriff Walsh, this is insane. I am not operating a post office. I never have been. This is harassment." She smiled that cold smile again. "Mr. Thompson, after 48 hours, any attempt to operate your postal facility will result in immediate arrest. Your property will be seized as evidence. Your tools, your workbench, everything in that garage will be confiscated." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You cannot take my tools. Those belong to my father. Some of them are over 70 years old." Federal postal violations are serious crimes, Mr. Thompson. When evidence is seized, it is held until the case is resolved. That could take months or years. I stood there holding the papers, feeling the walls of my life closing in. Everything I had worked for, everything I cared was about to be destroyed by someone who had invented a crime that did not exist. "I know what you are thinking," she continued. "You think you can fight this. You think you can find a lawyer or file complaints, but I have been doing this for 23 years. I know how the system works. Why are you doing this to me?" For a moment her mask slipped. I saw something ugly underneath. "Because I can, because order matters, because people like you think rules do not apply to them." "What rules? What have I done wrong?" She put her sunglasses back on. 48 hours, Mr. Thompson. make the right choice. After she left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the papers. The legal language was designed to sound official and intimidating, but it was built on a foundation of lies. She had taken my simple garage workshop and twisted it into something criminal through sheer force of will and abuse of authority. I thought about my father, who had built that workbench with his own hands. I thought about the satisfaction I got from bringing old tools back to life. I thought about 15 years of peaceful evenings in my sanctuary, all of it about to be destroyed by someone who had decided to make me a victim. That night I could not sleep. I sat in my garage, running my hands over the tools that might soon be gone forever. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. I had followed every rule, respected every law, harmed no one, and none of it mattered. But somewhere in the depths of my anger, a new thought began to form. Sheriff Walsh had built her case on the premise that my garage was a post office. She had stated it officially, in writing, with the authority of her badge behind it. What if I stopped fighting that classification? What if I embraced it? I pulled out my laptop and started researching federal postal regulations. Not to defend myself, but to understand exactly what Sheriff Walsh had claimed about my property. If my garage was officially a post office according to her paperwork, then it had to follow postal regulations. All of them, including the ones she had not thought about. I spent the next 36 hours diving deep into federal postal regulations. What I discovered was beautiful in its simplicity. Sheriff Walsh had been so focused on using postal law as a weapon that she had never considered how it might be turned against her. According to Title 39 of the United States Code, any facility officially designated as a post office must provide public access during posted hours. It was not optional. It was federal law. If my garage was truly a post office, as Sheriff Walsh had declared in her official paperwork, then I was legally required to allow public access. More importantly, any attempt to restrict that access would be a federal crime. I found the exact statute. No person shall willfully obstruct or retard the passage of mail, nor obstruct the correspondence of others. If Sheriff Walsh tried to prevent people from accessing my garage post office, she would be violating federal law herself. The irony was perfect. She had created a legal framework that would force her to allow exactly what she was trying to prevent. I spent hours crafting the perfect online listing. I chose a local classifieds website, a Facebook community group, and 2 other platforms where people in my area looked for services. Free pickup available Garage Post Office, 1247 Maple Street. Attention! Due to official designation by local law enforcement, this garage facility is now operating as a post office. Public access is available during posted hours for pickup and delivery services. All federal postal regulations apply. Free pickup service for vintage tools, restoration equipment, and workshop supplies. Open Monday through Saturday, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Sundays, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. I included photos of my garage, my organized tool collection, and a copy of Sheriff Walsh's own paperwork declaring the space a postal facility. I made sure to quote her exact words about regular hours and organized storage systems. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I was not breaking any laws. I was not lying about anything. I was simply accepting Sheriff Walsh's classification of my property and following the legal requirements that came with it. If people wanted to come to my garage post office during posted hours, federal law required me to allow access. If they wanted to pick up vintage tools or restoration supplies, I was required to accommodate them. And if Sheriff Walsh tried to stop them, She would be obstructing a federal postal facility. I scheduled the listings to go live at exactly 6 p.m. on Friday, 2 hours before my 48-hour deadline expired. I wanted to give Sheriff Walsh just enough time to realize what was happening before she could react. I also prepared documentation of everything: screenshots of her paperwork, copies of the federal regulations, photos of my garage in its current state. If this was going to work, I needed to be ready for her response. My phone started ringing at 6:47 p.m. The first call was from a woman who wanted to know if I really had vintage hand planes for pickup. The second was from a man asking about the restoration supplies. By 7:15 p.m., I had 12 messages and 6 missed calls. I made the same response to everyone. Yes, this is a designated post office facility. Public access is available during posted hours for pickup services. All federal postal regulations apply. At 7:23 p.m., the first car pulled into my driveway, a middle-aged man with his teenage son. "We saw your listing online. We are interested in the vintage tools." I opened my garage door and gestured them inside. "Welcome to the Maple Street Post Office. Feel free to browse our available pickup items." The man looked around at my organized shelves, my workbench, my tool collection. "This is incredible. How long have you been collecting these?" "About 15 years. But according to official designation, this is now a post office facility. Everything you see is available for public access." More cars arrived. A woman interested in woodworking tools, a retiree who collected vintage equipment, a couple who had heard about the situation on social media and wanted to show their support. By 8 p.m., there were 8 people wandering through my garage, examining tools, asking questions, and taking photos. It was exactly what I had hoped for. That was when Sheriff Walsh arrived. Sheriff Walsh's squad car screeched into my driveway at 8:17 p.m. She jumped out like the garage was on fire, her face red with rage. Behind her, Deputy Martinez climbed out more slowly, looking like he was dreading whatever was about to happen. "What the hell is going on here?" she shouted, marching toward the cluster of people examining my tool collection. I stepped forward calmly. "Good evening, Sheriff Walsh. As you can see, the Maple Street Post Office is operating according to federal regulations. We are providing public access during posted hours." "This is private property. These people need to leave immediately." A woman holding a vintage chisel looked confused. "I thought you said this was a post office." "It is a post office, ma'am. Sheriff Walsh designated it as such in her official paperwork. Federal law requires public access to postal facilities during operating hours." Sheriff Walsh's face went from red to purple. "I did not. That is not what I meant." "I have copies of your documentation right here," I said, pulling out the manila envelope she had given me. Quote, "This structure is being operated as a postal facility. Your words, Sheriff, your signature." A man near my workbench chuckled. "So you are saying this garage is legally a post office? That is amazing." According to Sheriff Walsh's official determination, yes. And federal law is very clear about public access to postal facilities. More cars were arriving. Word was spreading on social media faster than I had expected. People were sharing photos of my garage post office, Sheriff Walsh's paperwork, and the absurd situation she had created. "Everyone needs to leave right now," Sheriff Walsh demanded, but her voice cracked with uncertainty. "Ma'am, with respect, that would be obstruction of a federal postal facility," said the retiree who had been examining my hand planes. I looked it up on my phone. It is a federal crime to interfere with postal operations. Deputy Martinez finally spoke up. Sheriff, maybe we should. Martinez, get these people out of here. I cannot do that, Sheriff. If this is officially a post office like you said, then they have a right to be here. The crowd was growing. Someone had called a local news station. I could see a van with a television logo pulling up across the street. People were live streaming on their phones. What had started as a clever bit of legal jujitsu was turning into a viral sensation. This is not what I meant, Sheriff Walsh finally exploded. I never said this was actually a post office. But Sheriff, you filed official paperwork declaring it a postal facility. You cited federal postal regulations. You threatened federal charges for unauthorized postal operations. A woman with a microphone and a cameraman approached us. I am Jennifer Walsh with Channel 7 News. Can you tell us what is happening here? I smiled. We are operating the Maple Street Post Office according to federal regulations. Sheriff Walsh officially designated this facility as a post office, so we are providing public access as required by law. Sheriff Walsh, is it true that you declared a private garage to be a post office? Sheriff Walsh looked trapped. If she admitted the garage was not really a post office, she would have to explain why she had threatened federal charges. If she maintained it was a post office, she would have to allow the public access to continue. No comment, she said, backing toward her squad car. But Sheriff, your own paperwork says. No comment. She climbed into her car and drove away, leaving Deputy Martinez standing in my driveway looking embarrassed. The news reporter turned back to me. Sir, can you explain how a garage became a post office? I held up Sheriff Walsh's paperwork. According to this official document, my garage has been designated as an unauthorized postal facility, so we made it authorized. Federal law requires public access to postal facilities. We are just following the law. The reporter smiled. This is going to be a great story. By Saturday morning, the story had exploded across social media. The local news segment had been picked up by regional stations, then national outlets. #Garage Post Office was trending on Twitter. The video of Sheriff Walsh's meltdown had been viewed over 2 million times. My phone had not stopped ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers offered free representation. People from across the country called to express support and share their own stories about abuse of power by local officials. But the most satisfying call came from Mayor Thompson at 9:30 a.m. Mr. Thompson, this is Mayor Sarah Thompson. I need to speak with you about this situation with Sheriff Walsh. Good morning, Mayor. I assume you have seen the news coverage. I have, along with everyone else in the county. This is a public relations nightmare for our community. I understand, but I am just following federal postal regulations as outlined by Sheriff Walsh herself. Mr. Thompson, we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. Sheriff Walsh made a mistake. She is willing to acknowledge that and withdraw her complaints against you. Is she willing to acknowledge that publicly? There was a long pause. What do you mean? Mayor, Sheriff Walsh has spent months harassing me over a fictional crime. She has damaged my reputation, cost me money, and caused me tremendous stress. If she wants this to end, she needs to publicly admit that she was wrong. I will discuss that with her. The discussion must not have gone well, because by noon, Sheriff Walsh held a press conference. I watched it live on my phone while people continued to visit my garage post office. The irony was delicious. Sheriff Walsh stood behind a podium looking like she had not slept in days. I want to address the situation involving the Maple Street property. There has been some confusion about the designation of this facility." A reporter interrupted. "Sheriff Walsh, did you or did you not declare that Mr. Thompson's garage was operating as an illegal post office?" "The situation has been mischaracterized. My concern was about potential code violations and irregular business activities. But your official paperwork specifically mentions federal postal regulations. You threatened federal charges for unauthorized postal operations." Sheriff Walsh's jaw tightened. "I may have been overly aggressive in my language, but Mr. Thompson was clearly operating outside normal residential use." "Sheriff, what evidence did you have that Mr. Thompson was operating a post office?" "He maintained regular hours. He had organized storage. People came and went." "Sheriff, that describes every garage workshop in America. Do you plan to investigate everyone who organizes their tools?" The press conference fell apart from there. Sheriff Walsh tried to maintain that she had legitimate concerns while simultaneously backing away from her postal facility claims. She looked like someone trying to unsay words that were already carved in stone. By evening, the story had reached national news. CNN ran a segment called Post Office Gate. Small-town sheriff's power trip goes viral. Fox News covered it as federal overreach backfires. The Daily Show prepared a comedy segment. But the real victory came the next morning. I was having coffee in my kitchen when I saw an unfamiliar car pull into my driveway. A woman in a business suit got out and walked to my front door. "Mr. Thompson, I am District Attorney Patricia Chen. I need to speak with you about Sheriff Walsh." "Good morning, Ms. Chen. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Thompson, my office has received numerous complaints about Sheriff Walsh's conduct. Not just from you, but from other residents who have come forward after seeing the news coverage." "Other residents?" "Sheriff Walsh has apparently been using her position to harass people over minor or imaginary violations for years. Your situation brought their stories to light." I invited her in and listened as she explained. Mrs. Henderson had called to report that Sheriff Walsh had threatened to arrest her for running an unlicensed daycare because she sometimes watched her grandchildren. A local mechanic had been accused of operating an illegal salvage yard because he had old car parts in his yard. The pattern was clear and consistent. "Mr. Thompson, we are opening a formal investigation into Sheriff Walsh's conduct. We may need your testimony." "Of course, whatever you need." "There is one more thing. Sheriff Walsh has been reassigned to administrative duties pending the investigation. She will no longer be conducting field operations." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had not realized was there. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. 3 months later, Sheriff Walsh was quietly transferred to a desk job in the county records department. No formal charges were filed, but her days of terrorizing ordinary citizens were over. The investigation had revealed a pattern of abuse that went back years, but somehow my ridiculous garage post office had been the straw that broke the camel's back. The Maple Street post office officially closed after 2 weeks of operation. I put up a simple sign: "Post office hours concluded. Garage workshop resumed." But the people kept coming. Not as customers or postal patrons, but as friends and neighbors who had been inspired by the story. Mrs. Henderson started bringing cookies again, but now she stayed to chat about the woodworking projects she wanted to try. The Johnson family brought their teenage son over to learn about tool restoration. Even people from other neighborhoods stopped by to see the famous garage and share their own stories about standing up to bullies. The news coverage eventually died down, but the connections remained. I had learned something important about my community. Most people were decent, reasonable, and willing to stand up for what was right when given the chance. Sheriff Walsh had counted on isolation, fear, and the assumption that fighting back was too difficult or expensive. She had been wrong about all of it. My garage workshop was quieter now, but it felt different, more purposeful. I still restored vintage tools, but now I also taught neighbors how to use them. The space that had been designated as a post office had become something better, a place where people came together to learn, share, and support each other. The legal victory had been satisfying, but the real victory was deeper. I had refused to be bullied by someone who thought authority was more important than justice. I had used creativity and persistence instead of anger and force. Most importantly, I had discovered that sometimes the most powerful response to abuse is not to fight it directly, but to expose its absurdity. Sheriff Walsh had wanted to make an example of me, to show what happened to people who did not comply with her arbitrary demands. Instead, I had made an example of her, showing what happened to bullies who pushed too hard against people who refused to be pushed. My garage was no longer a post office, but it had become something more valuable, a symbol of what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The tools were still organized on their shelves. The workbench was still solid maple, built by my father in 1962, but now they represented something beyond their practical purpose. They were proof that sometimes the best way to fight the system is to make it work exactly as it claims to work. That was the real lesson of the Maple Street Post Office. Not that the system was broken, but that it could be fixed by people who cared enough to hold it accountable to its own rules.